if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will still try to.
Политический режим основан на Конституции Российской Федерации и сформирована власть строго в соответствии с основным законом государства. Чего не скажешь об Украине. Сейчас не хочу вдаваться.
We wanted to ask you about the third round of talks that took place in Istanbul. You hadn't commented on them, and we wanted to know, has Kiev responded regarding the proposal put forward in Istanbul, about the three groups that could work online? What is your general assessment of the negotiations and prospects? And another thing. Not long ago, literally the other day, Zelensky said, I think even today, that there's no sense negotiating with Russia, you have to wait for the regime to change. Well, in principle, we can wait. If the Ukrainian leadership believes that now isn't the right time and insists on waiting, we're ready to wait. That's first. Second, our political regime is based on the constitution of the Russian Federation, and the authorities are formed strictly in accordance with the nation's fundamental law, which you can't say about Ukraine. I don't want to get into details now, but today's authorities there aren't based on the Ukrainian constitution. The constitution is clearly violated, but I don't want to delve into that now. As for negotiations, they are always necessary and important, especially if there's an intent for peace. My assessment is generally positive. How can you not see it positively when hundreds of people have returned to their homeland? That's positive. From humanitarian considerations, as you know, we handed over the bodies of thousands of fallen Ukrainian soldiers. In exchange, we got several dozen of our guys who lost their lives for the motherland. Isn't that positive? Of course, it is. Disappointments, of course, arise from excessive expectations. That is well known. But to resolve things peacefully, you need thorough talks, out of the public eye, calmly, in a negotiating setting. That's why we proposed to create three groups, as you mentioned. In general, the Ukrainian side's reaction was positive. We agreed we could negotiate without cameras, without political noise, calmly, to seek compromise. They haven't started working yet, this process hasn't begun, but, again, the first reaction from the Ukrainian side, as we thought, was positive. So we expect this process to be completed. Also, a follow-up question. Are the long-term ceasefire conditions you voiced over a year ago still valid? Yes, those conditions absolutely remain. These are not conditions but goals. I specified Russia's goals. Before, people would say they didn't understand what Russia wanted. We outlined them in June last year at a meeting with the Foreign Ministry leadership. Everything is clear. The main thing is to eliminate the causes that led to this crisis. That is basic. And, of course, humanitarian issues, security issues in the broad sense, security for Russia, but also Ukraine. By the way, the Ukrainian delegation mentioned that maybe security for Russia and Ukraine should be discussed in the context of overall European security. That idea was voiced by one of their senior negotiators, and we think this is correct. We support it. And there's also the humanitarian aspect, the Russian language, the independence and dignified conditions for the development of the Orthodox Church, Christians, the Church in Ukraine. All this, in the aggregate, should be discussed and should form the basis for a long-term, lasting peace without any temporary limitations.
Russia keeps launching such attacks even when the whole world is calling on it to stop the war. A war that Russia started, a war that Russia keeps dragging on, a war that only the Russian leadership wants a leadership stuck in another era. They are mentally stuck in another century, a time of brutal violence, devastations, total disregard for human rights and equality. We all know such ideas and such times must never return to Europe. And we all know how to protect ourselves from that, how to protect Europe from what today's Russia is bringing. And I believe Russia can be pushed to stop this war. It started it, and it can be made to end it. But if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will still try to destabilize neighboring countries.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that we will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest newsmakers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the U.S. will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry ghats.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HD videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.